I think we're up to Enkyo Padohara today, is that right? Uh, Somebody want to read that? It's on page 23.
Sure, I'll be happy to. Prologue. When wheels are turning, wind is blowing, words fly this way and that. Is there a meaning to be discerned? The case. Bernie came from New York to take charge of Maizumi Roshi's funeral. A group of us were gathered at Zen Mountain Center, waiting for him to join us and give instructions. Although I hardly knew him, I was asked to pick him up at the Los Angeles airport and drive him back to Mountain Center, a 3-hour drive each way. At that time, as was my usual pattern, I had rented a low-cost rent-a-wreck. And there he was, waiting for his ride. Bernie got in, dozed a while, then woke up as we stopped and started along the strangely traffic-laden desert highway. It was hot, the car was noisy, its windows down and blowing the desert air in our faces. I was embarrassed that I was subjecting him to such discomfort. I apologized for the shabby car, for the heat, for the traffic, and for the very long drive ahead. Bernie adjusted his posture, looked at me, and said matter of factly, "Oh, then this is a good time to get to know you." Bing. Bing.
Thank you.
You want to read the commentary on the back page?
Okay, sorry. Commentary. In our years working together after this meeting, Bernie continued to teach me the value of dropping pretension and apprehension and insufficiency and recognizing the precious moment. Verse. Oh, now, here, on this hot and dusty road, because it is so well hidden, it takes a Zen master to expose the jewel hidden in the dirty car.
You want some context?
Well, to me, that means, we've all in our life have done that. We've been pretentious and never let anybody really get into us. And when somebody finally does get into you, it's like, oh, yeah, I've been this way all my life. And I wonder how many people I have alienated.
I had a little different response. It's all haiku. It's all haiku.
Yeah. But, I thought back, today being 9/11, and I thought back to when it did happen 23 years ago and how my life has changed based on that to me was an oh yeah moment. The same as sitting here reading, oh, now here on this hot, dusty road, because it's been well hidden. I think I've changed a lot in the 23 years, and it's made me more susceptible to helping other people than what I did prior. So to me, that's my aha moment.
Um, Ken, I'm curious, your question, if more context was, what were you saying?
Oh, well, yeah, this is my Zoom. This is Bernie's arriving to sort of in California to take charge of Miyazumi's funeral.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, you know, the funeral was a big deal. They did the formal Soto funeral for a major teacher. I don't know if any of you were at the funeral. It's one of the two Zen events that I wish I had been at that I wasn't at. And I don't remember now why I didn't make that trip. But Miyazumi died suddenly. It wasn't a death that came at the end of a long illness. That he hadn't been ill. He had been on a trip to Japan. He usually went to Japan every year on Mother's Day to visit his mother. And on that trip in 1995, he also did the formal, put in the formal papers at Soto headquarters to give Bernie Inca to make him a Roshi. And then went to stay for a few days with his mother. And probably had too much to drink and drowned in the hot tub at his mother's house on Mother's Day. The big formal funeral didn't happen until I think September. Enkyo was one of the senior students of Miyazumi who didn't get to finish with him. She wasn't such a long-term student. You know, Egyoku and Seizen, whose koans we did earlier, were also senior students. And they were long-term students of Miyazumi's. Enkyo was a student of Daido Roshi for a long time. And Dido was it's the Dharma brother of Bernie's, another successor of Miyazumi's. Uh, so, for the senior students, this was a shock. It was like a major having your teacher die. You're kind of in the middle of this thing. It's a lot like having your therapist die. Something that I don't think any of us are prepared for. Uh, and I think for all of the senior students of Miyazumi's, none of them were prepared. I don't think any of them had thought about, like if Miyazumi dies before I get transmission, who will be my teacher? Uh, so in this story, of Enkyo, that Enkyo is sharing, which is the story of her meeting Bernie for the first time. And I think, although she doesn't quite say it explicitly, realizing that Bernie is the teacher that she's going to finish with, it's a very big moment. You think about it, you say, well, and I can tell you, Bernie was going to say yes to any of Miyazumi's senior students who asked to finish with him. But I don't think any of them knew that. Uh, so in this sort of situation, I think you probably feel the stakes are pretty high about making a good impression on Bernie in that moment. This is like, why did I rent a wreck? Why didn't I rent a nice air-conditioned car to meet Bernie for the first time, to drive him back and forth here? Yeah, Jerry?
So what arose for me was, I think, kind of this general attitude that Bernie had about not waiting till things are perfect, about not waiting until you have all the ingredients for the perfect meal, or not waiting until you're fully enlightened before starting to help anyone else. So just that, even with all this crap going on, the bad car, the heat, not being ready, this was still the perfect time to take on a new student, or to help a student get restarted.
Yeah. It was a big turning point for Bernie too. Uh, and it created an interesting jumble in my life. Diane and I was set to get married in, I think, the following December. And Bernie was going to, had agreed to officiate. But he had this idea for the wedding. He was going to lead a retreat to the Holy Land in December 1995. He was going to co-lead it with Rabbi Don Singer, and was a successor of his, and Bob Kennedy, who was another successor Jesuit priest. The three of them were going to co-lead this thing to the Holy Land, and Bernie thought that was a great time for Diane and I to get married. We should get married in Jerusalem at the end of this retreat, which was kind of an interesting idea. It was at the time that Pavarotti and Herrera and Domingo were doing their 3 tenor concerts. I thought, this is cool. We're going to have a 3 sensei wedding. And then Mayazumi died, and all the plans got changed. Bernie dropped that retreat plan. The wedding got rescheduled to Staten Island, where we live. But we weren't going to have our rabbi because Don Singer was based in California and he wasn't going to be coming in. But we went ahead. We had the wedding scheduled for December 9th. And then at the end of August, Lex Hickson died. Did we do Lex's Koan yet? So we'll talk. Maybe I'll save some of this story for Lex's Koan, but Lex died, I think, in August. And they scheduled this big memorial service for him on December 8th. Lex was a student of many religions. He was a Sufi sheikh. He was studying Zen with Bernie. Bernie actually gave him transmission posthumously at the memorial service. He had done various Catholic and Greek Orthodox and Protestant. I remember what Protestant denomination. He'd done all kinds of studies, and not just dabbling. So he had studied with Rabbi Don Singer. He'd gotten bar mitzvah. So Don ended up coming in to be part of the memorial for Lex on December 8th. And so he was in New York, and Diane and I had our 3 sensei wedding on December 9th. And Bernie was still robed, was for a couple of years more. Shaved head, chanting strange Japanese sounding chants. Very shocking on Staten Island. but he could begin to do things differently because he didn't have to worry about upsetting Mayazumi in the same way he did when Mayazumi was alive. So this was a big time emotionally for both Bernie and Enkyo during that car ride. Bernie always got very meticulous with us when Mayazumi was coming to visit. You know, that we had to get all the service positions right. We had to get, you know, all the drumming, musical things right. You know, and this was like this was the last hurrah from Mayazumi. You know, his brothers were coming in to officiate, and it was a big deal. I'm telling you this. Why am I telling you this? It's uh Bernie's just being real in that moment. Was There's more to it than is just being real in a riding in a jalopy. He was being real at a hard time. You know, his teacher had just died. All kinds of responsibilities were falling to him now. You know, as Mayuzumi's successor, as the head of the family. And he didn't get sucked into being, you know, like a pompous jerk. It's cool. Dale?
So the way the koan reads, he gets in the car and he goes to sleep.
I didn't get that.
The way the koan reads, he gets in the car and he goes to sleep.
Yeah.
So he was just being real. He was tired. He went to sleep. I don't know if he said anything to Enkyo before he did that, you know. I guess the question is, did he have a responsibility to Enkyo to say, I'm really exhausted, I need to take a little nap here. We'll connect when I wake up? Or didn't it matter what she thought about him? You know, this big honcho ignoring her and falling asleep on her first thing.
No, I don't think it was intentional.
I
Yeah,
see.
you know, he was, I mean, I fall asleep in, you know, falling asleep in a car is like, you know, it's being rocked to sleep. Uh, and he probably didn't sleep on the plane. Uh,
So,
uh, so he's probably just tired. You know, and he was undoubtedly dealing with a lot of preparation uh, prior to getting on the plane. Uh, this, this this funeral for a major teacher is, you know, I'm not sure now when I say this, but it may have been the first time that there was a funeral for a major teacher in the United States. Uh, uh, and he was he was undoubtedly on the phone a lot with Japan, in the times leading up to that, and what arrangements did Mayuzumi's brothers want? I think was probably a lot. It was nobody here had ever done this. No, the funeral was in LA.
So in the beginning of the koan, it says, when wheels are turning, wind is blowing, words fly this way and that. Is there a meaning to be discerned? So the larger aspect of my question is, when we're true to ourselves, when we're just ourselves without pretense,
Mhm.
we're going to say things and do things that some people are going to have a reaction to. If you
Maybe.
speak the
I mean,
if you speak the truth enough, or your understanding of the truth, it's going to rub up against somebody's belief system. Do we have a responsibility? Do you have a responsibility as a Zen teacher to respond to that?
I don't think, well, I guess I'm envisioning it differently. Uh, that I think if what you're referring to when you say being true to yourself, that sometimes what we mean when we're talking like that is we're talking about saying what I think and not worrying about offending other people.
I'm more referring to Bernie walking into the car and going to sleep. Right? He was being true to himself. He was
I don't know, but see, we don't know that that's what happened.
okay. So pick something from your
You're
life.
making up,
Pick something from your life.
uh, I think when we, and this is probably an important step of, sort of letting go of our fears about other people's reactions and saying what we think. When we're in that phase, we often offend people. Uh,
The next phase.
that
I'm talking
wasn't
about the next phase after that.
that wasn't the phase that Bernie was in at that point. I don't think
Right.
that because Bernie wasn't saying what he was thinking. He was just being present. And when you're just present, you don't defend people. is the thought that comes up for me. So I'm thinking about, I think it's the story about Hakuin. When this girl in the village gets pregnant, but doesn't want to rat out her boyfriend. So she tells her parents that Priest Hakuin is the father of the baby. You all know that story? And they deliver the parent, they march out there with the baby and they hand it to the priest and say, it's your responsibility. Take care of it. And he says something to the effect of, is that so? Takes the baby, takes care of the baby. Sometime later, the boyfriend shows up and he's going to do the right thing and marry the girl. And she tells her parents the truth now. So they all march out to the temple, and the parents say, we made a mistake. You're not the father. And we'll take the baby back. And all that Hakuin says is that so? I mean, you can imagine all kinds of things that you or I might have said on either their first or their second visit that might have gotten people upset, right? But Hakuin doesn't. I mean, at that point in Bernie's life, for the rest of Bernie's life, and it was more so, as he got older, he was just being Bernie. He was just being himself. I think you saw that, right? In the car. Uh, tell you, I'm sorry. Did somebody want to say something?
Oh,
I'll say something. What's coming up for me is this idea that self-acceptance is the exact same thing as anatta, as ego, as selflessness. Or like that, like I'm an individual, and that before I can even experience the spiritual principle of unity, like I've got to be complete with myself. I don't like the word true self, but I like completeness or self-acceptance. And that's because otherwise the ego is just going to be so defensive to anything else. And so it's really a beautiful principle. They're actually the exact same principle. Like I'm an individual and we're all one, or however you want to state that. Because because I matter, my truth matters, and like I can be myself. And like I don't know, that's just so important. That's like with Christianity, like you couldn't do that. The human experience was flattened. We're all the same and we're all like bad or whatever. Or that's maybe evangelical Christianity, but like either way, like I matter, I'm important, and as soon as I'm complete with myself, you realize I realized the egolessness, and it was like because they were the exact same thing. And so, Hawkewing, I love that story, but like I might have done something different in that situation, and that might have been okay too, because that would have been how I would have handled it, because I'm not Hawkewing. And what I'm getting at from all of these koans is, yeah, like this principle really matters. Like these are individuals here, and how they individually react with Bernie or Maizumi or with Bernie is important. And what I'm also like curious about, I feel I have an intuition. So my teacher studied with Maizumi briefly, and then finished with shit, I can't remember his name. The guy up here in Colorado.
Jerry Wick.
Yeah,
Sheesh.
thank you. Shishin Wick. Yeah, thank you. I feel less identity with my teacher, and probably Bernie, and I feel like I'd identify more with Maizumi, but I don't know. Like I'm just I'm just a little bit more curious about Maizumi. This wasn't expected, but he also had a nature that was like he enjoyed to have a complete ego experience. Like when he was in ego, and this is kind of how I feel like my ego and my enlightened mind, value wise, they're the same. I just have to be aware of both and which one I'm coming from, and it's okay. Usually, maybe not always, but like if I'm having an ego experience, I just have a complete ego experience and I enjoy it. And I feel like was Maizumi like that? Like he enjoyed he enjoyed pleasure, in other words. Is that true to say about him? But I also don't
That's
know, because there's
probably true. I didn't know him well. That I think I only saw him maybe 3 times, and only had one interview with him. So most of my relationship with him is through Bernie. I did see him and Bernie together on several occasions, and that was seeing them together was for me a big teaching. Uh, uh, yeah, it's Mayuzumi has become a complex figure in our lineage. And it's a big lineage. Now, multiple generations of teachers, of successors since Mayuzumi's. Uh, and I think some people would gravitate to your formulation of Mayuzumi as enjoying pleasure. Some people would say he had a drinking problem. And, whether you call it the pleasure principle or the drinking principle, uh, that aspect of Mayuzumi could become a problem
yeah.
for many of his students. That
I
because he would he wanted people to drink with him. Uh, Gento Roshi, who was the second of Mayuzumi's successors, uh, shared this perspective. that in Genpo's view, Bernie was lucky. Because Mayazumi would call them to come and drink at night often. Come over right now. And Genpo would always run over. Others would. And it was fun, because Mayazumi would say things sometimes much more candidly when he was drinking than he would when he was in his formal teacher role. But Bernie was married and had 2 kids. And Bernie was able to say to Mayazumi, I can't come right now. We're just sitting down to dinner. Things like that. So Bernie had some protect. Bernie didn't want to be in that drinking scene.
What I'm curious, what was Bernie's ultimate evaluation of Maizumi? I mean, they almost sound opposites in some ways. Like it's almost like this Sangha has deified or sanctified Bernie, and Maizumi almost seems like a Chogyam Trungpa type enlightened being. And I'm just wondering, what ultimately did Bernie say? His summation of Maizumi.
Bernie loved him.
Okay.
And totally grateful to him for the teaching he got and for his generosity. That when Bernie first started studying with Mayazumi, they had begun the Zen Center of Los Angeles. Mayazumi hadn't finished his studies yet.
Oh, interesting.
And Mayazumi in the beginning wouldn't do koans with Bernie because he hadn't finished his own koans.
That's fascinating to me for some reason, because I envisioned him as like way ahead or something, you know,
2 years older, I think.
and also not that much farther ahead in the teachings, or not finished with the
Well,
koan.
the difference is, so it's everything is, these things feel like gigantic. Bernie is 4 years older than me. Bernie and I discovered Zen at just about the same moment. I was in high school, he was in college. Almost immediately, Bernie started sitting regularly, and within a couple of years of that, found Mayazumi. Mayazumi wasn't still, a student. Took me 30 years to start sitting regularly and to start working with a teacher. So Bernie was a Zen student 30 years longer than me, even though we were close to the same age and had discovered Zen at about the same time. Bernie and Mayazumi were about the same age. Bernie was probably in his 20s, probably in his mid-20s. Mayazumi may have been in his late 20s. Bernie had just discovered Zen. Mayazumi had grown up in the Zen temple. His father was a Zen master. His older brothers were ahead of him on the path to becoming Zen masters. By the time Mayazumi was 25, he'd been a Zen student for 25 years. Some of it not consciously, but he'd been a Zen student all his life. Bernie was learning as an adult from Mayazumi liturgy that Mayazumi began learning before he could walk. So while, in an age way, Bernie and Mayazumi were peers, as in an age way, Bernie and I were peers. Bernie was not Mayazumi's peer as a Zen student. any more than I was Bernie's peer as a Zen student. Uh,
But it sounds like, did Maizumi at first like maybe blow off the path his father wanted for him, like because his brothers
No.
were ahead of him, or no,
No.
never. Okay.
never.
My,
You know, what he did do, which is wonderful, I love, is Mayuzumi is not his father's name. Kuroda is his father's name. All the others are Kurodas. Mayuzumi is his mother's maiden name. He changed his name, took Mayuzumi as his last name, so that that family, that lineage would continue, and his kids would be Mayuzumi. I love it about him. He was a mother's boy, you know, in this wonderful way, because it always horrified me. There are these koans that have always horrified me. You know, Hui Neng, the sixth patriarch, who was the sole support of his mother. Here's somebody chanting the Diamond Sutra and abandons his mother to enter a monastery. Kind of similar kind of story with Tozan, who's the, you know, the founder of the Soto sect. You know, and his mother comes, follows him, tries to, you know, knocking on the door. He's meditating. He won't let her into the monastery. She dies. And my favorite Mayuzumi story from Bernie
Good morning, this is Ken.
is that whenever Mayuzumi would do a teisho about Tozan,
Hi. Hey,
his mother,
did you send the,
he would cry,
out for me?
and I love that. But part of Mayuzumi's generosity with Bernie was that these wonderful teachers, Mayuzumi was doing his koans with Kurio Roshi, who was a great Rinzai teacher, and with Yasutani Roshi. And they would come to LA, lead sessions, and to continue, you know, to work with Mayuzumi. And Mayuzumi made it possible for Bernie to start doing koans with Kurio and with Yasutani during the period before he was
That's
finished, felt qualified
but
to
the
to
person,
teach, be a koan teacher for Bernie.
was gonna come here today to draw the blood, and I called and said,
maybe Shoan can mute Muyo. It sounds like Muyo forgot to mute. Shoan, can you do that? Or can somebody do that? Because he's on a call and he's unmuted.
I'm sorry, I just heard you. What do you need, Joel?
Muyo, can you mute Muyo? Because it sounds like he's on a call and he forgot to mute. So
Got it. Thank you. Got it.
Here.
And Bernie was always very devoted to Mayuzumi. I'll give you another anecdote. Some of you may have heard this from me before, because it's a favorite of mine. Shortly before Tokido, I said to Bernie, I know I have to shave my head during for Tokido, but do I have to shave my beard? And you know, without a moment's hesitation, Bernie responded, as long as Mayuzumi is alive. You know, I'd heard that before in a different context when I was about 10 years old. coming up on Passover, a friend of mine asked his mother, if they had to use the special dishes for Passover. And his mother had said without, well, I don't know, she's doing something in the kitchen when Alan asked this, and his mother just responded, as long as your grandmother is alive. And it was Bernie's relationship to Mayazumi and to the tradition in which he was trained was the same kind of respect. Mayazumi had a way of describing this relationship. He told the senior students that they should swallow the fish whole, the whole fish. Later they could spit out the bones. But you take in the whole teaching. And Bernie did that. He did it more thoroughly and more completely than any other of Mayuzumi's students. He had the advantage, he was the first and he was the senior, and he got more attention and more teaching than anybody else. But he took it all in. And people who knew him I didn't, but the people who knew him in when he was at ZCLA, he was the most Japanese of the lot. He was ferocious. The stick, the Kiyosaku, the wake up stick during sesshin. Bernie was rough. And Bernie took all this heavy duty, almost military Japanese sin and ran with it. And then he gradually moved away. And it was a lifetime process for him of working with, what's the essence? What's the bones? What's Zen? What is Japanese culture? And he believed that Mayazumi died because his work was done, in bringing Zen to America. And for Mayazumi to hang around would be an obstacle to the further Americanization of Zen. And Bernie experienced that. There were things he would not do because he would not offend Mayazumi.
Wait, can you repeat that? You said he died because his work was finished? Is that what you said? Or that's like one way to frame it?
Yes, that's the way in which Bernie framed it.
Okay. Just for like his own healing. And it might be true. Like, who knows? Which I think are the same thing.
Yeah, Mayazumi was very aware, talked to them all the time about how he could not create American Zen. It's not American. It's Japanese.
Right. Trump came to did the same thing, actually. Came to the same, was saying the same thing here in Boulder.
There's a good Trunk from Mayazumi story. They were very close.
Oh,
Uh,
really? I knew that he and Sunru were close. I didn't know he and Maizumi were close. Let's hear it.
uh, and, for a while, they had a plan for the next, phase of the American Buddhism, uh, was that, Trungpa's successor and Bernie were to be the co-leaders of the next phase. But they had been at some conference in the mountains, uh, probably up near you Boulder people. And they've been drinking, which is something they both did. And I guess hey, Trungpa had a driver, was driving them through the mountains wherever they were going next, and Mayazumi and Trungpa both needed to pee. So they stopped the car, at one of these, kind of lay-by things, and you pull off, it's like a view thing, but it's dark, it's night. But you can pull off the road in the Rockies there. And at the edge of this lay-by thing, you can pee off the cliff, So they're standing side by side, peeing over the cliff. And Trungpa says to Mayazumi, the streams of our practice have finally merged. Uh, yeah, they both, you look at it, from contemporary place, you know, uh, they both probably drank too much. And yes, they both, in some way, they probably both needed to get out of the way. And it probably would have been okay with the rest of us if they'd waited another 25 years to get out of the way and continued to teach. I mean, certainly Bernie never expressed anything like, uh, I'm so glad that Miyazumi's gone because now I can blah, blah, blah. Uh, sorry.
I have a curiosity question. I kind of have the impression, maybe I'm wrong, but that Bernie's upbringing wasn't particularly Jewish, not extremely so. But yet, I'm kind of thinking that I'm wondering if a lot of the Jewish Orthodox ritual is what lends this comfort with the Japanese Zen ritual. Can you just comment on your feeling about that or your
I'm not sure I got the whole question. So I'll say a couple of things and then you tease me some more. My impression is that Bernie's childhood was a little more Jewish than mine. Maybe not quite as politically activist, certainly socialist. The most important thing about his childhood was his mother died when he was young. But I think his Jewishness it's just acquired by osmosis, if nothing else. Like in that in that time, that growing up in the 30s and 40s, uh, that being Jewish was not out of sight. You didn't have to be religious to be Jewish. There was probably more Yiddish in Bernie's childhood than in mine. There's a great story. Bob Kennedy, our Jesuit, when he was early in his Zen studies, was in Japan studying with Yamada. Who was Yasutani's successor. And Yamada must have sensed that Bob was beginning to get freaked about what was he doing as a Jesuit with all his Jesuit commitments, throwing himself into Zen. And Yamada told him not to worry, that the Zen practice is not going to make you a Buddhist. It'll make you a better Catholic. And I suspect that in his Zen practice, Bernie became more Jewish. Jerry, does that speak at all to what you were raising?
Yeah, I mean, I was raised as an Orthodox Jew and rejected it at a fairly young age. And I suspect that, I guess, make everything about yourself, but I suspect that has something to do with my antipathy for a lot of the Zen traditions. I don't like bowing to a cushion or, a lot of this other stuff. But and I was just kind of curious about Bernie's connection between the two. Obviously, there are a lot of Jewish people who have, taken on a lot of Buddhist stuff, and there, I don't know, must be hundreds of books of Buddhism books written by Jews, right? So I'm just puzzled about, how these things come together so often.
Mm. Uh,
Could I offer a story, I think, in relation to what you're just talking about? It's when the Baal Shem Tov was creating the Hasidic movement. And there's a story that he was in front of the congregation one day, and there was a little boy in the congregation who didn't know how to read yet. And so quietly, as people were praying, the little boy was saying the alphabet. That's all he knew. And people began to shush him, and they got upset with him because he was disturbing their prayers. Until the Baal Shem Tov heard what was going on and said, what is this? And people were expressing their frustration and their anger towards this little boy because he was disturbing their prayers. And the Baal Shem Tov looked at everyone and said, it is only because this little boy in his devotion is saying the alphabet that these letters are rising up through all the thickness of your pious devotion and reaching heaven. I love that story.
I'll tell you a story that reminds me of. How are we doing on time here? A few more minutes. Okay. So this is a story that heard from one of Bernie's successors. There, I think only four successors of Bernie's who are not represented in the Koan book. One because he had died without any successors. We didn't know who to get a story from. But there were three who were alive when we did the book, who for one reason or another were angry with Bernie on some level. Well, two were alive and angry with Bernie and chose not to participate. The third is Mui Baraka. And Mui had already passed. But some of his successors who we reached out to were angry and chose not to participate. Bernie had, when we were still in Yonkers, Bernie had invited Mui to come and give a talk once years ago, and Mui told this story. They just reminded me of because Mui was teaching Zen at Sing Sing, famous New York State prison. And he was proposing to do the Jakai class with people who were, group of men who were, to say the least, pretty rough customers. And Mui had done the Jakai class as a student the same way I had. And in doing the Jakai thing, we studied each of the precepts. And I think we spent 10 months doing this. 1 month on each of the 10 grave precepts. We looked at we looked at our experience with each precept from 6 different points of view. From the point of view of each of the pure precepts, like what is non-killing from the point of view of ceasing from evil, and what is non-killing from the point of view of doing good for others. And we also looked at it from these 3 points of view, which we called Hinayana, Mahayana, and Buddhayana. Use of Hinayana and Mahayana borders on, probably crosses the border to offensive, because it's a kind of very negative way for the Mahayana folks to look at their older brothers. But Hinayana we took to mean, literal meaning. What's the literal meaning of non-killing? And the Mahayana is to look at it figuratively, metaphorically. So when you look at non-killing from the Mahayana point of view, you're looking at things like killing time. Is I killing time today? And then the Buddhayana is looking at non-killing from the absolute point of view. You know, there's no separation between self and other. Who's killing? What's being killed? But the deal on this thing was that we wrote these reflections. And Mui's introducing this course to these inmates at Sing Sing, and this guy comes up to him and tells him that he doesn't know how to read. How is he going to do this? And that really struck a chord in my liberal body. And I thought, listening to Mui, he's going to come up with a way for this guy to, he's going to come up with a workaround so that this guy can study the precepts and take Chikai, even though he doesn't know how to read. And Mui says, I guess this is the time to learn to read. And this guy learned to read. And took him longer, but he did Chikai. And that story has stayed with me, my God, close to 30 years now. Maybe longer. Dale.
I have a short story, I think, relevant to Jerry's question. So in 1970, I went to a workshop with Philip Capel at the University of Michigan. Must have been 300 people in the group. One of the participants during the question and answer period said, I'm a practicing Jew, but I have an attraction to Zen. What do I do? And Capel said, who were you before you were a Jew?
I like Yamada better.
Me too.
You have a couple of more minutes.
I think these stories have brought me back to the koan that we started with today, and I was a student of Mui's, and we sat in a local prison, and vividly remember the time when Mui said to me about the prison sangha. He said, I love these guys. I don't necessarily trust them. And, because they've had lifetime practice as con men. And so whether it's Maizumi's drinking or in the hot car, it's sort of like I can choose all these reasons to separate myself from you, to judge you, to go, oh, Maizumi was, he wasn't fully there because he was drinking, kind of thing. But it seems to me that this koan and so much of this is because with the koan, I woke up one morning several days ago feeling really inadequate and full of doubt. And I read this koan, and the word that really hit me was, Bernie continued to teach me the value of dropping pretension and apprehension and insufficiency and recognizing the precious moment. And when I read that, it was like, I'm clinging to my own definition of my own insufficiency and using that as an excuse and as a reason to degrade myself, to feel bad, to disconnect from other people, to not take responsibility for what can I do right now? And what can be done sort of in the greater scheme of things besides my own little view of my insufficiency. And I love that the whole thing about Enkyo Roshi is sort of seeing the insufficiency of the moment, the hot car and the windows and the noisy. And Bernie was just saying, in the midst of all this, what a great time to get to know each other in a deeper way, in a fuller way. And anyhow, so I
Beautiful.
It's like when she says, it takes a Zen master to find the jewel in the dirty old car. It probably doesn't. I think we can somehow come up with that, even if we're not a Zen master. But he certainly sets the the level that we aspire to, I think.
can't resist one other Mui story. And it's a little bit, I don't mean this as look what I did kind of thing. To me, it was so of the moment, I guess. We were doing Jukai ceremony in the prison, and Mui and Margaret were there, and family, they were doing some kind of work in the room we usually sat in. So we were in kind of like the turret, I guess, or the round room extension, and family had come, people were allowed to come, and when everything was finished, Mui said, Margaret and I are going to leave now. You can stay, or, if you, so I stayed, and I have this tendency I'm fascinated with acoustical places. And that room in its roundness had the most amazing acoustics. And it's one of these moments where I don't know where it comes from, but I started singing Amazing Grace. And these guys joined. And so it was this room of prisoners singing Amazing Grace with the guards around the periphery. And it was just precious. It was,
It's a little bit like Johnny Cash at Folsom Prison, huh? I'll just share another story. This is a story of the prisoner or the former prisoner as teacher. A friend of mine had corresponded with this guy while he was still inside. He had been incarcerated at Marion, which is a high security federal prison. fascinating guy. One of the founders while he was inside of the Marion Brothers. And I got to know him a little bit when he got out and came to New York. And it was sort of interesting because he came with a check because he had earned some money while he was in prison. You know, they make you work and you earn some money, and when you leave with a check. But he left with a check and no ID because he had been in prison for a long time. He had no IDs. And around the corner from the office where I was working was a branch of the Chase Bank where I banked. And Karamoko went over there to cash his federal prison system check. And they wouldn't cash it because he didn't have an ID. He didn't have a New York State driver's license or something, you know? And I thought this was pretty outrageous. So I went over there with him. And I thought, you know, like, cause I'm a customer, you know, like, and actually they did cash his check finally. You know, as long as basically I signed for it. So that if this federal prison system check bounced, they would take the money out of my account. But I was still fuming as we walked out of the bank. And Karamoko says to me, "Hey, take it easy, Ken, you know, cool down. The last time I was in here, I robbed the place." Jeff, should we wrap up?
I have a quick Baal Shem Tov Zen story I'd like to share. I don't know the accuracy of this, but Baal Shem Tov had a grandson who he loved dearly. One day he's bouncing him on his knee and says to his grandson, I guess his grandson's like 3 years old, and my understanding is his grandson, the torch was passed to him. He became the next leader, Baal Shem Tov or whatever they were called. Anyway, he's bouncing, and he takes his hand and he touches his nose and he says to his grandson, "Is this Zadie?" Grandson says, "No." Touches his hand. "Is this Zadie?" "No." He does this for a couple of minutes, and the kid jumps off his lap and runs out of the room. And he gets concerned and he runs out after him. Grandson was hiding behind the door. And when Baal Shem Tov comes through the door, grandson goes, "Zadie!" And the kid says, "There's Zadie."
What is Zadie? Is that
Grandfather.
grandfather? Ah,
Is everybody coming back for the next round?
And just as a reminder, uh, that next one will be 2 weeks from tomorrow. It'll be on a Thursday the 26th, and then and back to noon Eastern time. So mark your calendars.
You know, the next koan up is Jitsudo. Jeff, if you could, I don't know if they're gonna have some new people joining us, perhaps?
I will send a reminder to the large group. So
Hey, and tell me,
and there probably will be new people coming in from promoting it. Yes, Ken.
you know, and maybe some people from the first group who didn't make it to this during the summer,
Yeah,
perhaps, but let there have anybody coming that they should perhaps read the Jitsudo koan.
25, is that the one?
Yeah, it's on page 25. Alfredo Ancheta. Okay. Be well, everybody. Stay safe.